The gravel crunched under my boots as I stood at the gate of the house I'd bought 10 years ago. The house I'd never seen. The house that was supposed to be my mother's sanctuary while I disappeared into the kind of work that doesn't make it onto resumes. The gate was open, swinging slightly in the Pacific wind, and I could hear music drifting down from the cliffside estate, laughter echoing against stone walls. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway like a dealership showroom. Mercedes, Lexus, a Tesla with vanity plates. I adjusted the contractor's jacket I'd picked up at a thrift store in Portland, pulled the baseball cap lower over my eyes, and walked through that open gate like I belonged there. Like I was here to fix a pipe or check the electrical panel. 61 years old, and I learned a long time ago that the best disguise isn't a mask. It's confidence in the right costume. People see what they expect to see. The music got louder as I approached. Jazz. Expensive jazz. The kind rich people play at parties to prove they have taste. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see maybe 30 people holding wine glasses, their clothes worth more than most people's monthly rent. And then I saw her. My mother, Margaret Ward, 79 years old and moving through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her movements careful, almost apologetic. She wore a simple gray dress that hung too loose on her frame, and her hair, once thick and auburn, was now white and pulled back severely. I stopped walking. The world narrowed to just her face, and something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't what I'd arranged. This wasn't what I'd paid for. A woman in a red cocktail dress snapped her fingers at my mother, pointing to an empty glass. My mother hurried over, head slightly bowed, and refilled it without a word. Without thanks. I watched as she retreated back toward what must have been the kitchen, and I followed, keeping my distance, using the crowd as cover. The kitchen was massive, all white marble and stainless steel, and my mother stood at the island, arranging canapes with shaking hands. I approached slowly, cleared my throat softly. "Excuse me, ma'am." She turned, and I saw her face fully for the first time in 10 years. She was thinner than I remembered, the bones of her face more pronounced, her eyes carrying a weariness that made her look even older than her years. But it was her. It was definitely her. Yes. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. "I'm looking for Margaret Ward," I said, keeping my voice neutral, professional. "This is her house, right?" "Oh." She wiped her hands on her apron, a nervous gesture. "I'm Margaret, but this isn't my house. I just help out here. Are you here about the plumbing?" Mr. Ward said someone might be coming to look at the guest bathroom. The cold thing in my chest turned to ice. I stared at her, searching her eyes for recognition, for anything that said she knew who I was. But there was nothing, just polite confusion and a hint of anxiety, like she was worried she'd given the wrong answer. "Mom," I said quietly, dropping the act. "It's me, Elias." She blinked, tilted her head slightly. "I'm sorry, Do I know you from somewhere?" "My memory isn't what it used to be." She laughed, but it was forced, uncomfortable. "I'm always forgetting faces." I opened my mouth to say more, but a voice cut through the kitchen, sharp and commanding. "Margaret, we need more of those shrimp things," and someone spilled wine in the library. A woman appeared in the doorway, mid-40s, blonde, beautiful in that carefully maintained way that requires both money and dedication. She wore diamonds like punctuation marks. Her eyes swept over me with dismissal, then landed on my mother with irritation. "Well, did you hear me?" "Yes, Mrs. Ward." "Right away." My mother turned back to the counter, her movements faster now, almost frantic. "Mrs. Ward." The woman called herself Mrs. Ward. I looked at my mother's left hand. No ring. Then back at the blonde woman, who was still standing there, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the doorframe. "And you are?" she asked me, her tone suggesting I'd already overstayed my welcome. "Contractor," I said. "Plumbing issue. The guest bath is upstairs, second door on the right. Try not to track dirt on the carpets." She disappeared back into the party. I looked at my mother one more time. She was focused on her tasks, her world compressed to the immediate demands being made of her. I could push this. I could make a scene right now, force the issue, demand answers. But something stopped me. The training kicked in. When you don't understand the battlefield, you don't charge in. You gather intelligence. You watch. You wait. I'll come back another time, I said. She nodded absently, already moving toward the refrigerator. I walked out of that kitchen, through the crowd of strangers drinking in my mother's house, and I made myself memorize faces. The blonde woman who'd called herself Mrs. Ward. The man holding court in the living room, laughing too loud, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of tan that comes from vacation homes and golf courses. He looked familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I was almost at the door when I heard him call out, "Nina, baby, come here. Tell these people about the Amalfi Coast trip." Nina, the blonde woman. She moved to his side, and he wrapped his arm around her waist with the casual ownership of long marriage. And then I saw his profile clearly, and the ice in my chest became something else entirely. Something hot and volatile and dangerous. Caleb, my younger brother. 20 years younger, to be exact. The kid I used to throw a baseball with in the backyard. The teenager I'd paid for college before I shipped out. The man who was supposed to check in on Mom while I was overseas. I walked out of that house and kept walking until I reached the rental car I'd parked 3 blocks away. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth like I was controlling recoil. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in colors that should have been beautiful but just looked like blood and fire. If you're watching this and you're feeling what I felt in that moment, hit that subscribe button, because what happened next, what I found out, what I did about it, you're going to want to hear all of it. I didn't go back to the house that night. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, a place called the Seabrook that had seen better decades, and I checked in under a name that wasn't mine. The clerk didn't care. Cash makes people incurious. I sat on the bed that smelled like industrial detergent and cigarette smoke someone had tried to cover up, and I pulled out my phone. 10 years. 10 years I've been gone, doing the kind of work that required you to be legally dead in some countries and invisible in others. Security, contracting, they called it in polite company. In reality, it was about protecting people who could afford the best protection, in places where protection was the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave. I'd sent money home every month, direct deposits into an account I'd set up specifically for Mom's care. Enough to keep her comfortable, to pay for the house, to hire help if she needed it, to cover any medical expenses. Enough that she should have been living like a queen in that clifftop mansion, not serving canapes to my brother's friends like hired staff. I opened my laptop and started digging. When you spend a decade in the intelligence and security world, you learn things. You make friends in useful places. You understand how information moves and how to intercept it. I started with the property records. The house at 47 Cliffview Drive, Breakwater Cove, Oregon. Purchased in 2015 for $1.2 million cash. Buyer, Elias Michael Ward. That was me. That part was right. But the ownership transfer date made my blood pressure spike. 3 years ago, the deed had been transferred to Caleb James Ward. Not sold, transferred, with a notarized document bearing my mother's signature and a legal note citing powers of attorney for an incapacitated person. Incapacitated. My mother. The woman who used to do the New York Times crossword in pen. The woman who taught English literature for 30 years and could recite Yeats from memory. I kept digging. Guardianship papers filed with the county court. Margaret and Ward declared mentally incompetent by a Dr. Leonard Cross, M.D., neurologist. Guardianship granted to her son, Caleb James Ward, with full authority over her finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. The documents were 3 years old, around the same time as the property transfer. I pulled up bank records next. This took longer, required old passwords, and security questions I'd set up a lifetime ago. The account I'd been depositing money into month after month, year after year. The last deposit was 2 weeks ago. $3,000, same as always. But the balance showed $87.32. I scrolled through the transaction history. Every deposit I'd made had been withdrawn within days. Not by my mother. By Caleb James Ward, authorized user. For 3 years, maybe longer, every dollar I'd sent to take care of my mother had gone in my brother's pocket. My hands were shaking. I set the laptop aside and stood up, paced the narrow space between the bed and the wall, trying to work off the rage building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. But I wasn't done. There was more to find, and I knew it. I could feel it. I sat back down and searched for my own name. Elias Michael Ward. The results made me go very still. There was an obituary, published 18 months ago in the Breakwater Cove Chronicle. Elias Michael Ward, 59, died overseas in a contracting accident. He is survived by his mother, Margaret Ward, and his brother, Caleb Ward. A private memorial service was held. There was a photo, one from 15 years ago, before the gray hair and the scars and the weight of everything I'd seen. They declared me dead. My own brother had declared me dead. I kept searching, my movements mechanical now, detached. Life insurance payout, $250,000, paid to Margaret and Ward, but deposited into an account managed by her guardian, Caleb James Ward. Retirement accounts, liquidated. The house I'd owned before the Clifftop Mansion sold. All of it funneled through my brother's hands. All of it legal, because he had guardianship, because a doctor had signed papers saying my mother couldn't manage her own affairs. I found more documents. Medical evaluations that painted a picture of advancing dementia, confusion, memory loss, inability to care for herself. All signed by Dr. Leonard Cross. All contradicted by what I'd seen that evening. A woman who was thin and frightened and treated like a servant, but whose eyes were clear and who'd spoken in complete sentences and who'd arranged canapes with the kind of precision that doesn't come from a confused mind. The rage was still there, hot and insistent, but something else was building alongside it. Something colder, more patient, more dangerous. I'd spent 10 years learning how to handle situations that couldn't be solved with emotion or impulse. You gathered intelligence. You planned. You executed with precision. And you didn't stop until the mission was complete. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, past names I hadn't spoken to in years, until I found the one I needed. Jonah Pike. We'd worked together in Kabul, then again in Bogota. He'd gotten out around the same time I did, traded his tactical gear for surveillance equipment and a private investigation license. I pressed call. He answered on the third ring. This is either a wrong number or the ghost of Christmas past. Jonah. It's Elias. A pause. Ward? Jesus. I heard you were dead. Yeah. So did my family. That's why I'm calling. Another pause, longer this time. I'm listening. I told him. Not everything, but enough. The house. My mother. My brother. The false death notice. The guardianship papers. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You need proof, he said finally. Not just documents. You need documentation. Video, audio, witnesses. You need it airtight, because guardianship fraud is hell to prosecute, especially when the guardian is family. Can you help? I'm in Seattle. I can be in Breakwater Cove by tomorrow afternoon. He paused. Elias, this is going to get ugly. You know that, right? It's already ugly, Jonah. I'm just making sure everyone else sees it too. I made another call after that. Renee Calder, an attorney I'd met through another contractor whose mother had been scammed out of her life savings by a nursing home. Renee specialized in elder exploitation, and she had a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. She answered on the first ring, and after I explained the situation, she said 3 words that told me everything I needed to know. I'm in. When? Tomorrow. I'll send you the address. I hung up and sat in the silence of that motel room, the laptop screen casting blue light across the walls. Somewhere out there, in the house I bought with money earned protecting people in war zones, my mother was probably cleaning up after my brother's party. And my brother was probably counting his money, secure in the knowledge that no one was coming to stop him. He was wrong. If you're still with me, drop a like on this video, because the next part gets darker. And it gets personal. I spent the next day watching the house from a distance, using equipment Jonah had dropped off that morning along with a brief, grim handshake. High-powered binoculars, a parabolic microphone, a camera with a telephoto lens that could read license plates from half a mile away. I set up in a vacation rental across the street, told the owner I was a nature photographer interested in the coastal bird population, and proceeded to document every movement in and out of that house. Caleb left at 9 in the morning, driving the Tesla with the vanity plates. WRDSDKR. Wordsmith? No. Ward Stacker. Money Stacker. I felt my jaw tighten. Nina left an hour later in the Lexus, dressed for what looked like a tennis date. The house was quiet for a while, just the occasional glimpse of movement through the windows. Then, at 11:30, I saw my mother. She came out the side door, carrying 2 bags of trash to the bins at the edge of the property. She was wearing the same gray dress from the night before, or one just like it, and she moved slowly, like everything hurt. I watched her through the binoculars, watched the way she paused at the top of the driveway to catch her breath, the way she rubbed her lower back before heading inside. Jonah called at noon. I'm set up. Got 3 cameras with clean sight lines, audio pickup on the main living spaces. What's the play? Documentation first. I need to see what happens when I'm not there. I need to know how bad this is. And then I make it right. The surveillance equipment did its job. Over the next 3 days, Jonah and I compiled footage that made me want to put my fist through a wall. We watched Nina's snap at my mother for moving too slowly, for breathing too loudly, for existing. We watched Caleb ignore her entirely unless he needed something, and then speak to her in the tone you'd use with a particularly slow child. We watched my mother eat her meals standing at the kitchen counter, scraps left over for whatever Caleb and Nina had for dinner. We watched her apologize constantly, a steady stream of, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I'll do better. And we watched her sleep in a converted storage room in the basement, on a cot with a thin blanket, the door locked from the outside at 10 p.m. every night. I watched that footage in the vacation rental, Jonah sitting beside me in silence, both of us understanding that what we were seeing was abuse. Systematic, deliberate, sustained abuse. My mother wasn't being cared for. She was being imprisoned, and she was being erased, her existence reduced to servitude in her own home. On the 4th night, I went to the house. Alone. I waited until after midnight, until the lights in the upstairs bedroom went dark, and then I used skills I'd learned in places I couldn't name to enter through the kitchen door without making a sound. The alarm system was expensive but predictable, and I'd watched Caleb enter the code enough times through the long-range camera to know it by heart. His wedding anniversary. Narcissists are always so obvious. I moved through the house like smoke, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, orienting myself to the layout. Expensive furniture, expensive art, expensive everything, all bought with money that should have been taking care of the woman locked in the basement. I found the door to the lower level and opened it carefully, each movement precise and silent. The stairs creaked on the 3rd step, and I skipped it, continued down into a space that was cold and damp and smelled like mildew. There was a narrow hallway, a door at the end with a bolt lock on the outside. I slid the bolt open and eased the door inward. The room beyond was small, maybe 10 by 10, with a single high window covered by a curtain. My mother was asleep on the cot, curled on her side, the blanket pulled up to her chin. I stood in the doorway and watched her breathe, and something inside me that had been holding together through pure willpower finally cracked. This was my mother, the woman who'd read to me every night when I was a kid, the woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes and ride a bike and stand up for what was right, the woman who'd held me when my father died and told me it was okay to cry. And she was here, locked in a basement, treated like garbage by her own son, while I'd been halfway across the world thinking she was safe. I backed out of the room silently, closed the door, slid the bolt back into place. I climbed the stairs, exited the house the same way I'd entered, and walked back to the vacation rental with my hands shaking and my vision blurred. Jonah took one look at my face and handed me a glass of whiskey. I drank it in one swallow and set the glass down harder than I meant to. Tell me what you need, he said. I need evidence that stands up in court. I need medical evaluations that prove she's competent. I need to prove guardianship fraud, financial exploitation, and elder abuse. I looked at him, and then I need to take back what's mine. Comment below if you've ever felt this kind of rage. The kind that doesn't make you loud. It makes you quiet. It makes you patient. It makes you dangerous. Renee arrived the next morning with a briefcase and the kind of focused intensity that made me understand why she won cases. We sat in the vacation rental, reviewing the footage, going through the documents I compiled, building a case brick by brick. This is prosecutable, she said after an hour. multiple felonies, fraud, exploitation, false imprisonment. But we need her testimony, and we need medical experts who will contradict Dr. Cross's evaluations. Can you get them? I can get them. But Elias, you need to understand something. When we move on this, it's going to be fast, and it's going to be brutal. Your brother will lose everything. He'll go to prison. His wife probably too. This will destroy your family. I thought about my mother sleeping on a cot in a locked basement. My brother already destroyed my family. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. She nodded. Okay, then here's what we do. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. We needed to get my mother out of that house, get her evaluated by independent medical professionals, and get her testimony on record. But we couldn't just grab her. That would be kidnapping, regardless of my relationship to her. We needed legal authority, which meant emergency guardianship petitions, adult protective services, and a judge willing to sign orders on the evidence we compiled. Renee started making calls. Within 2 days, she'd assembled a team, a geriatric psychiatrist from Portland, a social worker with 30 years of experience, and a judge who'd presided over enough elder abuse cases to know the signs. We submitted our petition with exhibits that included the surveillance footage, the financial records, my own statements as the person who'd been declared dead, and character witnesses who remember my mother from before Caleb had taken over her life. The judge issued an emergency order. Adult protective services would arrive at the house in 3 days with a police escort. They would remove Margaret Ward from the premises, conduct evaluations, and hold a hearing to determine next steps. 3 days, 72 hours. I spent them watching the house, documenting everything, and planning my own next move. Because I wasn't going to let strangers be the ones to tell my mother she was free. I was going to do it myself. On the morning of day 3, I made a phone call. Caleb Ward. I'd made my voice smooth, professional, enthusiastic. Speaking. Who's this? My name is Grant Holloway. I'm a private investor based out of San Francisco, and I'm calling about your property at 47 Cliffview Drive. I understand it's not currently on the market, but I'm prepared to make an offer significantly above market value if you'd be willing to discuss a sale. There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning. How far above market value? I'm thinking in a range of $2 million. Cash. 30-day close. Another pause. That's generous. Very generous. What's the catch? No catch. I have a client who's very interested in coastal properties, and this one checks all the boxes. Location, condition, view. But I need to see it in person. Would you be available for showing this afternoon? This afternoon? I need to check with my wife. Mr. Ward, I'll be honest with you. I have 2 other properties I'm looking at in the area. Whoever can show me their place first is probably going to be the one who gets the offer. I can meet you at 3 p.m., or I can call the next seller on my list. 3 p.m. works. I'll text you the gate code. I hung up and looked at Jonah. We're in. He shook his head slowly. You're a cold son of a bitch, Ward. I learned from the best. At 2:45, I pulled up to the house in a rental BMW, wearing a suit that had cost more than most people's monthly mortgage and carrying a leather portfolio that made me look like exactly what I claimed to be, a man with too much money and too little patience. Caleb was waiting at the door, all smiles and firm handshakes. Grant, pleasure to meet you. Come in. The house looked different in daylight, less like a party venue and more like a showroom. Everything positioned perfectly, everything expensive and tasteful and devoid of personality. Nina appeared from the living room, wearing a dress that probably cost what my mother used to make in a month of teaching. This is my wife, Nina. Nina, this is Mr. Holloway. Lovely to meet you, she said, extending a hand. Can we offer you something to drink? Wine? Coffee? Coffee would be great, thanks. She disappeared toward the kitchen, and Caleb launched into his pitch. Square footage, ocean views, recent renovations, the exclusive neighborhood. He was good at it, I'd give him that. Smooth, confident, the kind of guy who could sell you something you didn't need and make you thank him for it. We walked through the main level, Caleb pointing out details, me nodding and taking notes on a pad I'd brought specifically as a prop. When we reached the kitchen, I saw my mother at the counter, washing dishes. She glanced up briefly, then back down, making herself small and invisible. Don't mind Margaret, Caleb said casually. She helps out around the house. Margaret, we're doing a showing, so maybe take a break for a bit. She dried her hands quickly. Of course. I'll just be in the back. Actually, I said, and I let my voice carry just enough authority to stop both of them. I'd like to see the entire property, including the lower level. I'm very interested in the full scope of the space. Caleb's smile flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. The lower level is really just storage. Not very interesting. I'm a thorough buyer, Mr. Ward. I like to see everything. You understand. Of course. Right this way. He led me to the basement door, chatting the whole time about potential uses for the space. Home gym, maybe. Wine cellar, media room. The door was unlocked. That was new, and we descended into the same cold, damp space I navigated in the dark 4 nights earlier. As you can see, it's unfinished, but there's a lot of potential. Caleb was saying, but I'd stopped listening. I walked to the door at the end of the hall, the one with the bolt lock on the outside. I turned to look at him, and I let my expression shift, let the professional mask slip just enough. What's in here? Just a storage closet. Really not worth. I pulled the bolt and opened the door. The room was exactly as I'd seen it. Cot, thin blanket, high window, the smell of mildew and despair. Who sleeps here? I asked quietly. No one. It's storage, like I said. Some old furniture, boxes. I turned to face him fully, and I saw the moment he registered that something had changed. The air had shifted. The game was different now. Don't lie to me, Caleb. He went very still. I'm sorry, who are you really? I reached up and pulled off the glasses I'd been wearing as part of the costume. I stood straighter, let my posture shift from businessman to something else. Something harder. Something he should have recognized 20 years ago, if he'd been paying attention. I'm the brother you declared dead, so you could steal our mother's life. The color drained from his face. Elias? Yeah, me. Surprise. He stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the wall. You're supposed to be dead? I know. I read the obituary. Very touching. Sorry I missed my own memorial service. I took a step toward him. Where is she, Caleb? I don't know what you. Our mother, Margaret Ward. The woman you've kept locked in this basement for 3 years. The woman you stole from. The woman you made disappear. Another step. Where is she right now? She's not locked anywhere. She's free to go whenever she wants. She has mental problems, Elias. Dementia. She needs supervision. Really? Because I've watched her for a week, and she seems pretty clear-minded to me. Scared. Abused. But clear-minded. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made us both turn. My mother appeared at the bottom, Nina behind her, looking confused and increasingly alarmed. Caleb? What's going on? Who is this man? My mother's eyes met mine, and I saw the confusion there, the fear. I stepped past Caleb, moved toward her slowly, keeping my movements calm and unthreatening. Mom, I said softly. It's me. It's Elias. She shook her head slightly. I'm sorry, I don't. Yes, you do. You just don't trust what you're seeing because they've been lying to you for so long. I kept my voice gentle, the same tone I'd used when she'd fallen and broken her wrist when I was 16, and I'd had to keep her calm until the ambulance arrived. You taught me to read when I was 4. You used to make me tomato soup and grilled cheese when I was sick. You cried when I left for my first deployment, and you made me promise to come home. Her hand came up to her mouth. Elias. Yeah, Mom. It's me. She took a step toward me, then stopped, looking back at Caleb. But they said you were dead. They showed me a paper. They said you died in an accident overseas. I know what they told you. They lied. Tears were streaming down her face now. They said if I tried to contact anyone, if I told anyone I didn't think you were really dead, they'd put me in a facility. They said I was confused. They said my mind was going and I couldn't trust myself anymore. I turned to look at Caleb, and the rage I'd been controlling for weeks finally found its voice. You told her that? You made her think she was crazy. He held up his hands. Elias, listen, this isn't what it looks like. She does have cognitive issues. Ask Dr. Cross, he'll tell you. Dr. Cross, who you pay to falsify medical records. That Dr. Cross. I pull my phone from my pocket. The same Dr. Cross who's currently being investigated by the medical board for exactly this kind of fraud. Nina grabbed Caleb's arm. What is he talking about? Caleb, what did you do? The sound of vehicles outside, multiple vehicles, made everyone freeze. Through the high basement window, I could see flashing lights. Red and blue. I looked at Caleb. That would be the police. And Adult Protective Services. And a very good attorney who's been building a case against you for the last week. I smiled and it wasn't nice. You're done. Hit subscribe if you want to hear how this ends. Because it gets better. I promise. The next 3 hours were chaos. Police officers, social workers, paramedics, all crowding into the house that had been my mother's prison. Renee arrived with documentation that made my brother and his wife go from arrogant to terrified in about 15 seconds. Adult Protective Services removed my mother from the premises immediately, with me following in my own car to the hospital where she'd be evaluated. Caleb and Nina were arrested. Handcuffs, Miranda rights, the whole show. I watched from the driveway as they were put into separate police cars, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just a hollow kind of completion. Dr. Leonard Cross was picked up an hour later at his office. The medical board investigation had turned up 6 other cases where he'd signed off on cognitive decline diagnoses for patients who later turned out to be perfectly lucid. Always with a family member present. Always with money changing hands. At the hospital, my mother underwent 4 hours of evaluation by 3 different doctors. Cognitive tests, neurological exams, psychiatric assessments. I sat in the waiting room and drank bad coffee and tried not to think about the fact that I'd failed her. That I'd been so focused on doing important work overseas that I hadn't checked in, hadn't visited, hadn't questioned the brief emails Caleb sent saying everything was fine. Renee found me around 8 p.m. She's clear. No dementia. No cognitive impairment. Some malnutrition, some indicators of chronic stress, but mentally she's sharp as a tack. She sat down beside me. She wants to see you. I found her in a private room, sitting up in the hospital bed, wearing a gown and looking small and fragile, but also more alert than she had in any of the surveillance footage. When I walked in, she smiled, and it was the smile I remembered from childhood. Warm. Real. Hi, baby, she said. I crossed the room and took her hand, and for the first time in 20 years, I cried. Not quiet tears, not stoic grief, but the kind of crying that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long and finally being allowed to set it down. I'm so sorry, I said when I could speak. I should have come back sooner. I should have checked. I should have. Stop. She squeezed my hand. You didn't know. How could you have known? He showed me death certificates, Elias. He showed me documents with official seals. He told me you were gone. And I believed him because why wouldn't I? He was my son. He's not your son. Not anymore. Sons don't do what he did. She was quiet for a long moment. I knew something was wrong. Deep down, I knew. But he was so convincing, and that doctor kept telling me I was confused that my memory was failing. After a while, you start to believe it. You start to think maybe they're right. Maybe you were crazy. You're not crazy, Mom. You never were. He gaslit you. He abused you. He stole from you. And he's going to prison for it. She nodded slowly. Good. Because that wasn't my son. That was someone wearing his face. She looked at me. You're my son. You came back. You found me. I'll always find you. That's my job. Over the next few days, the full extent of what Caleb had done came to light. He'd stolen approximately $1.8 million over 3 years. The monthly support I'd been sending, plus the life insurance payout, plus my mother's own savings and retirement accounts, plus the proceeds from selling my old house. He'd used it to fund his lifestyle, the cars, the parties, the vacation to the Amalfi Coast that I'd heard him bragging about. And he kept my mother as a virtual prisoner, forcing her to work as a servant in her own home, locked in a basement at night, systematically breaking down her sense of reality until she questioned her own mind. Nina claimed she didn't know. The investigation suggested otherwise. Text messages between her and Caleb discussed the old woman and keeping her in line, and maybe we should just put her in a state facility and be done with it. They decided against it because state facilities did inspections, ask questions, require documentation. Easier to keep her at home, under their control, working for free. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a woman named Sarah Chun, and she had the kind of focus that made me think she'd seen this before, had dealt with predators who preyed on their own family members. She sat with me and Renee 3 days after the arrests, laying out the charges in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and air conditioning. Elder abuse, multiple counts. Financial exploitation. Fraud. False imprisonment. Conspiracy. And that's just what we're charging them with initially. If we can prove Dr. Cross was paid specifically to falsify diagnoses, we add bribery and medical fraud to the mix. She looked at me. Your brother is looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. His wife, probably 8 to 12. Dr. Cross, he's done. Medical license revoked, criminal charges pending. He'll never practice again. What about my mother? I asked. What does she get? Everything back. The house reverts to her ownership. We're freezing all of Caleb's assets, pending restitution proceedings. Every dollar he took, she gets back, plus damages, plus punitive awards. And she gets her life back, Mr. Ward. That's not nothing. It wasn't nothing. But also couldn't give her back 3 years. Couldn't erase the nights locked in that basement. The days of being treated like she was invisible. The systematic destruction of her sense of self. Some things, once broken, don't heal the same way. My mother was released from the hospital after 5 days with a clean bill of health, physically speaking. Mentally, emotionally, that was going to take longer. Renee had helped me secure emergency guardianship, the legal kind, the kind where a judge looks at the evidence and says, yes, this person needs protection and this person can provide it. I moved her into a hotel suite, somewhere safe and neutral while we figured out next steps. The first night, I ordered room service, and we sat at the small table by the window, overlooking the harbor, eating pasta and bread, and trying to remember how to be mother and son instead of victim and rescuer. Tell me about where you were, she said quietly. All those years. What were you doing? So I told her. Some of it, anyway. The parts one could talk about. Security work in Afghanistan, Iraq, Colombia, places where violence was a daily reality and protection was a commodity. I've been good at it, the work. Good at reading threats, good at keeping people safe, good at making the hard calls when things went wrong. And it had paid well enough that I thought I was doing the right thing, sending money home, making sure she was taken care of, even if I couldn't be there in person. I thought I was protecting you, I said, making sure you were comfortable, safe. And instead, you were protecting strangers while your own family was betraying me. She said it matter-of-factly, without accusation, but it still hit like a punch. Life's funny that way. We spend so much time worrying about the monsters out there that we forget to check for the ones already inside the house. I should have visited. Should have called more. Should have asked more questions. She reached across the table and took my hand. Elias, listen to me. This is not your fault. You trusted your brother. I trusted my son. We both made the mistake of thinking family meant something to him, but didn't. And that's on him, not us. We sat in silence for a while, and then she asked the question I'd been dreading. Why'd he do it? The money, I understand. Greed, I understand. But why did he have to be so cruel? Why lock me up? Why make me work like that? Why tell me I was losing my mind? I didn't have a good answer. I've been thinking about it constantly, trying to understand the psychology of what Caleb had done, and the only conclusion I could reach was the one I didn't want to say out loud. But she deserved the truth. Because if you were confused, if you were incompetent, if you were losing your grip on reality, then no one would believe you if you tried to tell them what was happening. He needed you to be broken. Not just controlled, but actually broken. That way, if you ever did try to reach out, try to tell someone, they'd just think it was the dementia talking. She absorbed this, her face very still. Then she nodded. He always was smart, just never kind. Over the next 2 weeks, we started the process of reclaiming her life. The house at Cliffview Drive was legally hers again, but she didn't want it. Couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. So we put it on the market, the real market this time, and it sold in 4 days to a tech executive from Seattle who didn't care about the history, just the view. With that money, plus the funds being recovered from Caleb's accounts, plus the various insurance and retirement accounts that were being unfrozen, my mother was more than comfortable financially. Not that it mattered much to her. Money had never been what she cared about. She'd been a teacher for 30 years, living on a modest salary, happy with her books and her garden and her students. The wealth I'd accumulated the house I'd bought, it had always been more about my need to provide than her need to receive. "What do you want?" I asked her one morning over breakfast in a hotel restaurant. "Not what you think you should want. Not what's practical or sensible. What do you actually want?" She thought about it for a long time, stirring her coffee absently. "I want a small house. Something I can manage myself, with a garden, and windows that open, and no locked doors." She looked up at me. "And I want you to stay. Not forever, if you don't want to, but for a while. I miss so much time with you, Elias. I don't want to miss any more." So that's what we did. We found a house in a town called Harbor Glen, about 40 miles down the coast from Breakwater Cove. Small, 2 bedrooms with a yard that needed work but had good sun and soil that wasn't too rocky. Walking distance to the water. Quiet neighbors who minded their own business. We closed on it 3 weeks after my mother got out of the hospital, and I spent the next month helping her move in, painting walls, fixing the back deck, planting a garden that she planned with the same careful attention she used to give to lesson plans. I watched her come back to life in small increments. The way she hummed while she cooked. The way she started reading again, real books, not just magazines. The way she'd stand in the garden in the early morning with her coffee, watching the sun come up over the water, and she'd smile. Not the frightened, placating smile I'd seen at Caleb's house. A real smile. The one I remembered. The trial started 6 months after the arrests. Caleb and Nina both pleaded not guilty initially, their lawyers arguing that this was a misunderstanding, that they'd been trying to care for a difficult, declining parent, that any financial irregularities were mistakes, not malice. The surveillance footage killed that defense in about 10 minutes. Watching the jury's faces as they saw my mother being locked in that basement, as they heard Nina berating her for imagined failures, as they watched Caleb ignore her existence unless he needed something, I knew it was over. They changed their pleas to guilty on day 3. Caleb got 12 years. Nina got 9. Dr. Cross got 8 and lost his medical license permanently. The judge, a woman in her 60s who presided over the case with visible disgust, didn't mince words during sentencing. "What you did to your mother," she said, looking directly at Caleb, "represents a betrayal so profound, so calculating, and so cruel that I struggle to find adequate words. You didn't just steal her money. You stole her reality. You made her question her own mind. You imprisoned her in her own home and made her believe she deserved it. There's a special place in hell for people who do this to their own parents, and while I can't send you there, I can make sure you spend a significant portion of your remaining life behind bars thinking about what you've done." My mother didn't attend the sentencing. She said she didn't need to see it, didn't need closure in the form of watching her son be led away in handcuffs. She'd already found her closure in the garden at Harbor Glen, in the quiet mornings and the open doors and the life she was rebuilding brick by brick. But I went. I sat in the gallery and watched as Caleb was sentenced, and when he looked back at me before being escorted out, I didn't look away. I wanted him to see me, wanted him to understand that he hadn't gotten away with it, that someone had come back from the dead to make sure justice was served, that the ghost he'd created had become very, very real. After the trial, I thought about leaving, going back to the kind of work I'd done before, the security contracting, the overseas assignments. But every time I started making plans, I'd think about my mother in that basement and how I'd almost lost her because I was too busy protecting strangers. And I'd remember what she'd asked for, time. Just time. So I stayed. I got a job as a security consultant for a firm based in Portland, work I could do mostly remotely with occasional travel that never lasted more than a few days. I bought a small house about 10 minutes from my mother's place. Close enough to be there if she needed me. Far enough to let her have her independence. We fell into a routine. Sunday dinners at her house, where she'd cook the things I remembered from childhood, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. Weekday mornings when I'd stop by with coffee, and we'd sit in the garden. Weekend projects where I'd help with house repairs or yard work. And she'd tell me stories about her students from 30 years of teaching, stories I realized I'd never really listened to before because I'd been too young or too busy or too focused on my own life. One evening, about a year after everything had happened, we were sitting on our back deck watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. She'd made lemonade, the real kind with actual lemons, and we were both tired from spending the day planting new flower beds along the fence line. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. Do you regret it? Coming back? Finding out what happened? Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier for you to just keep believing I was fine, that everything was okay. Ignorance is bliss, you know." I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I shook my head. No, because if I hadn't come back, if I'd kept believing the lie, you'd still be in that basement. Still locked up. Still being told you were crazy. And yeah, knowing what happened, seeing what he did to you, it's going to be with me for the rest of my life. But you're free now. You're here. You're happy, or getting there. And that matters more than any comfort ignorance could have given me. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'm proud of you." I don't know if I've said that enough, but I am. Not because you saved me, though I'm grateful for that, but because you came home. A lot of men in your line of work, they get lost in it. The violence, the danger, the mission. They forget how to come home. But you did. You remembered. If you've made it this far in the story, thank you for staying with me. Leave a comment and let me know what you think happens next. Because life after justice isn't always simple. The money from the restitution, plus the sale of the Cliffview Drive house, plus my mother's recovered retirement accounts, left her with more wealth than she knew what to do with. She donated a chunk of it to organizations that helped elder abuse victims, set up a scholarship at the high school where she'd taught for students who wanted to pursue education degrees, gave some to local charities, and then, because she was still my mother and still believed in planning ahead, she set up trusts and accounts to make sure that if anything ever happened to her again, there would be safeguards, multiple people with oversight, regular audits, no single person ever having complete control. Trust, but verify, she said when her financial advisor walked us through the new structure. I trusted once without verifying. I won't make that mistake again. As for me, I found that I liked the quiet life more than I'd expected. The adrenaline of security work, the constant vigilance, the knowledge that any moment could turn deadly. It had been exciting in my younger years. But at 61, with scars both visible and not, I discovered that boring was actually pretty nice. Boring meant safe. Boring meant stable. Boring meant I could sleep through the night without jerking awake at every sound. I dated a woman named Claire for a while, a librarian I met when I went to help my mother with a book club she'd started. It didn't work out long term. We wanted different things, but it was good while it lasted. Reminded me that I was still capable of connection, of intimacy, of something beyond mission parameters and threat assessments. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the overseas years. Went fishing with Jonah, who'd moved to Oregon permanently and started a security consulting business of his own. Had dinners with Renee and her partner, swapping stories about cases and close calls. Built a life that looked nothing like what I'd imagined when I was young and thought the only thing that mattered was being important, doing important work, protecting important people. My mother thrived. That's the only word for it. She took classes at the community college, art and creative writing, and local history. She volunteered at the library. She made friends, real friends, people who valued her for who she was and not what they could take from her. She traveled a little, careful trips with tour groups, but she always came home to Harbor Glen, to her garden, to the house with windows that opened and doors that never locked. We never talked about Caleb. There was nothing to say. He was gone, and we'd both made peace with the fact that the person we'd known, or thought we'd known, had either never existed or had been corrupted so thoroughly that he was beyond redemption. My mother wrote him one letter about a year into his sentence. I never asked what it said, and she never told me. But after she mailed it, she seemed lighter somehow, like she'd set down a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. 3 years after I came home, my mother threw a party in her garden. A real party, not the kind where she served drinks to strangers in a house that wasn't hers. This one was full of people who loved her, who knew her, who'd supported her through the recovery. Jonah was there, Renee and her partner, Claire, who'd remained a friend even after we'd stopped dating, neighbors, book club members, former students who'd tracked her down through social media and driven hours just to see her. I stood on the deck with a beer in my hand, watching her laugh with a group of women near the flower beds, and I thought about the night I'd stood outside the Cliffview Drive house and seen her through the window, moving like a ghost, treated like she was nothing. And then I looked at her now, solid and real and fully present in her own life, and I understood something I hadn't before. Revenge isn't always loud. It isn't always violent. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well. Being happy, taking back what was stolen and rebuilding it into something better than it was before. Caleb had tried to erase our mother, to reduce her to nothing, to make her disappear. And here she was, surrounded by love, living proof that he'd failed. She caught me watching and smiled, waved me over. I walked down into the garden, into the crowd of people who'd become her chosen family, and she took my hand and squeezed it. "Thank you," she said quietly, just for me. "For what?" "For coming home. For not giving up. For remembering that family is supposed to protect each other, not destroy each other." I squeezed back. That's what sons do. Real sons, anyway. As the sun set over Harbor Glen that evening, painting the sky in those same shades of orange and purple, I realized that this was what peace looked like. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of safety. Not forgetting what had happened, but choosing not to let it define what came next. Not revenge, but restoration. My mother had survived what should have destroyed her. I'd come back from being declared dead. And together, we'd built something new from the ruins of what Caleb had tried to burn down. That was the real story. Not the betrayal. Not the imprisonment. Not even the justice. The real story was what happened after. The garden. The quiet mornings. The second chances. The people who hurt us don't get to write the ending. We do. And sometimes, if we're lucky, if we're persistent, if we refuse to give up, the ending is better than anything we could have imagined at the beginning. My mother lived in that house in Harbor Glen for another 12 years. She died peacefully, in her sleep, at 91 years old, with her garden in full bloom and her house full of love and not a locked door anywhere. I was there in the next room, close enough to reach her in seconds if she needed me. She didn't need me, not at the end. She'd already gotten everything she needed: freedom, peace, and the knowledge that she'd won. At her funeral, I stood in front of a church full of people whose lives she'd touched, and I told them the truth. Not all of it. Some wounds are too private to share with strangers, but enough. I told them about the teacher who'd shaped hundreds of young minds. The mother who taught me the difference between justice and revenge. The woman who'd survived a betrayal so profound it should have broken her, but who'd chosen to rebuild instead. My mother taught me that evil doesn't always look like a stranger in a dark alley, I said. Sometimes it looks like family. Sometimes it wears a familiar face and speaks with a voice you've known your whole life. But she also taught me that evil doesn't get the last word. We do, and the word we choose matters. The word she chose was forgiveness. Not for Caleb. He didn't deserve that, but for herself. Forgiveness for trusting when she shouldn't have. Forgiveness for not fighting back sooner. Forgiveness for the 3 years she spent believing the lies. The word I chose was remembrance. I would remember what happened. Remember the price of complacency. Remember that protection means nothing if you're protecting strangers while your own family suffers. But I would also remember the garden, the quiet mornings, the second chances, the 12 good years that came after the 3 bad ones. As I drove away from the cemetery that day, past the house in Harbor Glen that we'd already arranged to donate to a women's shelter, past the garden that would continue blooming without her, I thought about the night I'd come home to a house that shouldn't have been a crime scene, but was. The night I'd seen my mother and she hadn't recognized me. The night everything changed. If I could go back and do it differently, would I? Would I have come home sooner, checked in more carefully, trusted less blindly? Maybe. Probably. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward, carrying our scars and our lessons and our hard-won wisdom, and try to do better next time. My mother used to say that the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. Caleb had been indifferent to her suffering, to her humanity, to everything except what he could take from her. But love, real love, the kind that matters, that's about showing up, being present, protecting the people who need protection, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I spent 10 years protecting strangers in war zones, doing important work, or so I told myself. But the most important work I ever did was coming home, finding my mother, taking back what was stolen, and staying, Even after the crisis was over, even after justice was served, even when there was no more danger to fight against. Staying for the quiet moments, the ordinary days, the simple gift of time. That's the story. Not just the betrayal and the revenge, but what came after. The healing, the rebuilding, the 12 years of garden mornings and sunset evenings, and all the small, precious moments that make a life worth living. If you've been affected by elder abuse, if you know someone who's being isolated or controlled or made to feel like they're losing their grip on reality, please reach out. Call Adult Protective Services. Talk to an attorney who specializes in elder law. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't trust that family always means protection. Sometimes family is the threat. And sometimes the only thing standing between survival and destruction is one person who refuses to look away. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for staying until the end. My mother would have liked that. She always said the best stories are the ones that remind us why we fight, why we hope, why we keep going even when everything seems lost. So keep going. Whatever you're facing, whoever hurt you, whatever was stolen from you, keep going. Come home if you've been away too long. Protect the people who need protection. Choose your word carefully because words matter and endings matter, and you get to decide what yours looks like. My mother chose freedom. Il chose remembrance. And together, we chose peace. That's how the story ends. Not with revenge, but with a garden. Not with anger, but with morning coffee and open windows and doors that never lock. Not with destruction, but with 12 good years that proved evil doesn't get the last word after all. We do. And the word is love.